Here's the recording of pages 120 to 123. Ramses II, Ramses the Great. After Tutankhamun's death, a series of pharaohs came to the throne. These rulers spent much of their time trying to strengthen Egypt's empire. The greatest of them was a ruler who would have great in his title. Ramses II, or Ramses the Great. He ruled from 1290 to 1224 BC. A mighty warrior, Ramses donned his leopard skin cloak, mounted his chariot, and prowled the borders of his kingdom. With his highly trained army of charioteers, archers, and foot soldiers, the pharaoh put down revolts and fended off invaders who threatened Egypt's vast realm. His best-known campaign came against the Hittite Empire in the north. The Hittites were at that time the rising power of the ancient world. Their home was in the tableland of Central Asia Minor, but their power reached into the south, into Syria, and over to the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, the very lands that Ramses wanted to retain for Egypt. It was inevitable that the two sides would clash. In 1285 BC, they did. The Hittites were formidable foes, equipped with sturdy war chariots that carried a three-man crew. Their army was a battering ram that smashed through the battle lines of any enemy. Any, that is, except the ranks of Ramses the Great. For the Egyptians were skilled charioteers too, and their war chariots were lighter and swifter than those of their foes. Ramses himself was a skilled charioteer. When he led his army north, said his scribes, all the foreign lands trembled before him. When the two sides clashed at Kadesh, the Hittites did not tremble as much as Ramses would have liked. They drew the Egyptians into an ambush. Both sides fought hard, but neither could win. Ramses barely escaped with his life, while the Hittites failed to conquer the Egyptian lands. History has judged the Battle of Kadesh a tie. Ramses proved a more skilled statesman than a warrior. After the stalemate at Kadesh, he signed a treaty with the Hittites that gave the Egyptians control of southern Syria. So you can see here on the map, here's the Hittites. Okay, and then this was what the Egyptians had. Ramses II was more than a warrior. Like many pharaohs before him, he was a builder. This pharaoh, who loved to do everything on a grand scale, launched a building spree, the likes of which Egypt had never seen before. At Kamak, in the capital city of Thebes, Ramses II completed a great pillared hall that was about the size of a modern-day football field, probably the biggest temple the Egyptians ever built. About 250 miles south of Thebes, in the splendid isolation of Abu Simbel, he raised a huge new temple hewn from a cliff face overlooking the upper Nile. 4 colossal statues of Ramses, measuring 66 feet from head to toe, sat watching at the entrance to the temple, whose interior penetrated about 180 feet into the rock face. And here you can see these are the statues of Ramses, and there's the entrance down there. To the temple's great hall, he had his builders raise 8 massive statues of himself, each of them 30 feet tall. On the walls in between them, the pharaoh had his masons carve battle scenes that celebrated his victories in warfare. The temple was designed with astonishing precision and accuracy. The skill of the Egyptian builders was especially evident on two particular days each year, one in mid-October, the other in mid-February. On those 2 days, which may have marked the pharaoh's coronation and birthday, sunlight poured through the temple's entrance into its deepest recesses. There the light fell on the faces of two smaller statues. One was that of who else? Ramses wearing a crown. The other was that of the god Amen. The god Akhenaten tried to dethrone and Tutankhamun had worked so hard to restore. Ramses built more monuments to himself than any other pharaoh. He even stole many from his ancestors by chiseling their names from the monuments and writing his own. And like Akhenaten, he built himself a new capital. The city was located far from Thebes, deep in the pharaoh's ancestral homeland in the Nile Delta, about 400 miles to the north. It was known as Pi-Ramses, and its full name meant Domain of Ramses, Great of Victories. Ancient texts praised the new capital as beauteous of balconies, dazzling with halls of lapis and turquoise. Government building, mansions for important officials, warehouses bursting with grain, and temples for Egypt's gods rose from the delta's floodplain. Ramses died about 1224 BC after reigning more than 60 years, almost twice as long as most Egyptians lived. He was buried at Thebes, where thieves who cared little for his greatness discovered his tomb. Determined to make off with the riches of this magnificent ruler, they stripped his mummy and tomb. His home for the afterlife was pilfered as thoroughly as those of all other pharaohs. All, this is, except those of the boy king Tutankhamun. Egypt's new kingdom came to an end around 1070 BC, when, weakened by internal struggles, Egypt itself became prey to its neighbors. The kingdom suffered invasion and rule by a series of foreign dynasties. Over the years, Egyptians adopted some of these outsiders' ways. The conquerors, meanwhile, began to follow some Egyptian customs. The foreign rulers happily took the title pharaoh and even adopted the Egyptian religion. With all these changes and the passing of time, the ways of ancient Egypt gradually faded, but the treasures of Egyptians left behind in the dry desert climate, pyramids, sphinxes, hieroglyphs, mummies, still tell of the glory of the land of the pharaohs. Before we say goodbye to ancient Egypt, let's find out how a British archaeologist named Howard Carter found King Tut's burial place. Our story takes place in the year 1922. It begins far away from Egypt, in England, where Howard Carter has just heard some bad news from Lord Cameron, the wealthy man who provided funds for Carter's explorations. And that's the end of the reading of pages 120 to 123.